This is House Planning Help, Episode 8.
Have you always wanted to build your dream home? Maybe you know what you want. But what if it could be better? HousePlanningHelp.com. Speaking to the experts, searching for better ways, planning for the future. Build a better home. HousePlanningHelp.com podcast.
Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and in this session we look at the challenges you face in making a period property energy efficient. Tom Pakenham from Green Tomato Energy is my guest. He lives in a Victorian house which was retrofitted to the Passivhaus standard. Also, after 8 episodes, I have proof that this podcast has helped someone. I know, I'm staggered. A really nice email from Dr. James Shurrock, which I will read you later.
HousePlanningHelp.com.
Hello. If you heard our last session, I started by telling you that I discovered energy efficient homes from the 1980s, and I was very impressed by this fact, even though perhaps they didn't catch on as much as they could do, and I'm hoping that they are at the moment. But today I can go one better. An eco ship from the 1890s. And before I tell you a bit about it, I just want to thank Misha Hewitt from Earthwise Construction. I went to a talk that he did and he brought this up and I thought, fantastic, I've definitely got to nab that for the podcast. Excuse my pronunciation here. It is the Fram of Fridtjof Nansen. I think I just about got away with that, but this was a ship that was created in Norway for polar exploration, and it included some interesting pioneering ideas: highly insulated cork and felt, natural products, triple glazed skylight above there, an airtight layer of linoleum, had good ventilation, and they had a stove in there, but they just didn't use it because it was warm and comfortable already. And they even got to think, well, perhaps we can get this removed. And all of this information was taken from a book in 1897 called Farthest North. But I just find that fantastic. And I'm assuming we're not going to go further back into time and perhaps discover that Henry VIII had a Passivhaus castle or anything like that. I don't think so. It's time to meet today's guest. We look at period properties today with the help of Tom Pakenham.
HousePlanningHelp.com. The interview.
I'm here with Tom Pakenham from Green Tomato Energy. Hi.
Hi there.
And we're here with you today because this is something quite close to my heart as well, because I love all the old buildings. You've retrofitted a Victorian property, haven't you?
That's right. We've retrofitted our Victorian terraced home to Passivhaus standard.
Before we get into some detail there, I think actually your company on the whole and the wider group is very interesting. So how did you decide to set up Green Tomato Group?
So I was concerned about the way that we treat the planet and thought it was probably worth doing something about that, and decided that the best way of doing something about that was creating businesses that would offer people goods and services to reduce their environmental impact, but also to improve their lives.
And has that been something that has grown quite quickly? Have you found your market readily?
So the first Green Tomato business was called Green Tomato Cars, which was a minicab company which we ran on low emission principles. We used low emission vehicles and had a bunch of other environmental approaches which made it an environmentally friendly as possible. And that was taking an existing business sector and making it as environmentally friendly as possible. So it was we didn't have to create a whole new market. As a result, it was very popular, very simple product. The offering to the customer was exactly the same product as normal, if not a bit better, same price, if not a bit cheaper. And it just so happened that it was also kinder to the environment. So it was pretty compelling. People were very excited about it, and it grew extremely quickly. So that was the first business. Then we launched something called the Green Tomato Kit, which is a kind of green starter pack for the home. It contained a variety of energy, waste and water saving devices that people could install in their homes quite easily. It would reduce their environmental impact immediately. It would begin their kind of understanding of their impact and also save them a little bit of money in the process. That was reasonably successful. It was popular amongst social housing organizations and businesses who wanted to kind of help their employees be more environmentally responsible. But it was a bit more tricky to shift large quantities of them, partly because I think in this sector, people are very used to being given low energy products, environmentally friendly products for free. And so they weren't really prepared to pay for something. They just assumed it was something they should be given for free, partly because possibly the product itself was not quite as good as it could have been. And therefore, it didn't have that style cachet that I think people often buy on the basis of. So we still sell the Green Tomato kit primarily to social housing providers for their tenants to begin their kind of green journey. And Green Tomato Energy is the third company in the Green Tomato group. We exist to help people reduce their environmental impact through their homes. We offer consultancy services for low energy building. We offer services to SMEs and to social housing organizations in terms of designing low energy buildings, advising on carbon emissions, and increasingly we are building the ability to actually deliver the works to people. So we would go to their homes, say, this is what you could do, this is how much it would cost, would you like to do it? If so, we can do it for you. So that's the bigger goal, and we think that is what people really need. Sometimes there's a sort of danger for people that they get advice, but then it's very difficult to actually follow through on that advice, and we see that increasingly in the space. So we're hoping to address that.
So when you came to retrofitting your own property, it wasn't really a choice between renovation or new build. It was, you wanted to show this is what you can do right now.
So my wife and I were both Londoners. We have grown up in this part of West London all our lives. We didn't want to move away from the area. Our lives are here, our families are here. But the opportunity for new build in this part of town are pretty much zero. So we were always tied into having to do something to an existing building. Most of the buildings around here are Victorian terraced houses. There are some exceptions to that as a result of Second World War and other things, but the vast majority of homes are from the late 19th, early 20th century. And so we were forced into retrofitting rather than doing a new build. Also, we love the buildings, and we wanted to show the world, I guess, because there's a lot of rubbish out there being talked. We wanted to show the world that you can have a super low energy home which is sympathetic to the cultural heritage and is also very attractive to look at. Typically a lot of people think of low energy homes as some kind of bomb shelter, nuclear bunker, very unattractive, very angular, boring buildings. And as it happens, quite a lot of buildings are of that sort of more modern style, but it doesn't have to be the case. I mean, the point about low energy building is one of principles of physics rather than some aesthetic rules which someone in Switzerland or Austria has deemed to be absolutely necessary. So that was the purpose, and also we wanted to live in a beautiful building and a comfortable home, and that's why we decided to do what we did.
I know that any retrofitting for energy purposes is quite difficult, but why did you choose the Passivhaus standard?
I was slowly introduced to the Passivhaus standard over the course of about a year and a half. We knew that we always wanted to build a low energy home, but we hadn't at the beginning decided it had to be a passive house. But as I looked into it more and more and became better acquainted with the options that were out there, the Passivhaus standard became more and more attractive, primarily because it's actually quite flexible in terms of its application. It's a standard rather than a prescriptive method of building. So it allowed us to actually take an existing building of the geometry that it was and work out a way of making it perform to Passivhaus standard, which is interesting from an engineering point of view. I think that excited our team as well, because it was a bit of a challenge. But also, and I think the most important thing that people should realize about Passivhaus is that it's been around for quite a while now, and therefore there are a lot of passive houses, not so much in the UK, although a growing number, that have been tested over many decades, or at least a few decades. And therefore we have really good data to show that the Passivhaus method does actually work, and you can trust it. That shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, because it's devised by a physicist who specifically set about doing it in order to show that you can apply the rules of physics and you will achieve the same result again and again and again, as long as you build it correctly. But it was very convincing for that reason, and we thought if we build it correctly according to the design, it will work, so we can have confidence in that.
Where is the starting point? So you have your house. What do you do next?
You find an architect and someone who then understands energy engineering, and those two people have to work together to come up with a really robust and complete a design as possible. And you should spend time with your design team to make sure that what they're designing will work within your budget and within how you want to live in the property. So it's a combination of, it's a bit of time, basically, a bit of planning. We did a fair amount of planning. We lived in this house for 6 months before we started the work, so we got to know it a little bit. We had time to think it through and understand how we would live here, which I think is pretty helpful. Although a lot of people who are going to do a project like this will already have lived in a property for a while. But it's good to get to know the building, and don't rush the planning phase, because you will suffer at a later stage if you do. And then I would say start to build a relationship with whoever it is that's going to do the actual building works, because that will turn out to be a major challenge. It's finding a builder who is technically competent, but more importantly than that, understands what you're trying to achieve and is prepared to buy into the project. Typically, the attention to detail, the technical requirements of a building like this, particularly in a retrofit, are such that the building team, right from the head builder right through to the most junior builder on the team, they really need to understand some of the basic outlying principles of what you're doing technically, i.e. unbroken insulation, closing thermal bridges, making sure that the building is airtight, etc., etc. Because if they don't understand that, and if they don't buy into it as an objective that they believe in and want to achieve, then you will start to fail on the detail. And if you start failing on the detail, then the whole project can really come into jeopardy. So that's the next stage, is to basically make sure that your whole team is on side and pulling in the right direction. Then obviously work out how much it's going to cost and make sure you've got enough money, plus a bit extra, particularly for an old building where you start taking plaster off the walls and really investigating the guts of a building like this, any building really built in the 19th century, and you find some quite interesting structural surprises which will cost extra money and will need to be addressed during the course of the build.
So going back to the tradespeople that you are using, I can already tell that you've got a great amount of knowledge on this. Did you have that knowledge when you started?
So I've been working in, what you would term the environmental space for some years by the time we started this project. So some of the fundamental principles of what one is trying to achieve in that sense were quite deep rooted in me mentally. So I think that in many ways that's possibly the kind of most important foundation for embarking on any project that is attempting to be low impact. But technically too, I had some experience of solar thermal systems. I'm not bad at a bit of DIY, so I wasn't scared of building works and getting my hands dirty. So I think that was helpful. But no, a lot of it was learning as we went along, hearing what the team had to say. Part of the reason for doing the project was to learn, for me and for many of other members of the team. And I think as long as you approach the project with a kind of open mind and an understanding that something might change and that you might need to learn things as you go along, then you'll be fine.
Yes, I often hear that about how knowing as much as possible can help you. But I was just wondering, from the point of view of hiring people, how you know that they are actually people who are going to do a good job.
Okay.
Particularly when this project for you, it was almost a pioneering project.
Well, it was a pioneering project. This, along with a house up in Kensington, is the first of its kind, which is a full passive house retrofit in the UK. And as a result, no one had done it before. And some of the things that we've done here had not been done before by anyone in the UK, or not in this form exactly. So there was definitely a pioneering element to it. And actually, we made a mistake. So unfortunately, our architect, who's a very competent architect on many levels, it didn't quite work out in the longer run with him. His skill set wasn't quite suited to what we needed. So he did the initial work, and then we moved on and took over a lot of the more detailed design work within the Green Tomato Energy team from then onwards. So yeah, there are, you might get it wrong. I think that you might always get things wrong. This is the thing. You kind of accepting that you're going to get things wrong, but trying your hardest to not to. And then when you do, making the right decision as to how to bring them back on track is the right way to approach it, rather than necessarily expecting to get it right and then being surprised when you don't.
I live in a period property myself, and I suppose something that's in my mind at the moment is, if I tackled this, because it's a big project, what if I ruined the building in the process? I don't know even why I'm thinking that, but there's no back button or rewind.
Well, there is a rewind. It's just expensive. we love this house. We love living here. It's an incredibly comfortable place to live. It's beautiful property. It's very quiet. It has a sort of almost a unique feel to it, like many passive houses do. But it's really unusual. It's a really unusual place to live, and it's entirely different to living in a typical British Victorian house. Just the comfort levels and the sensation in here is. So the outcome has been fantastic. So far, there doesn't appear to be any structural issues, and certainly there's no reason to think that there will be. You know, obviously we paid quite a lot of attention to that side of things, but it is quite dramatic, a transformation. And so as a result, you know, if you're nervous, you will be nervous about it, and it is a, in quotes, risk. In life, you choose what your risk reward profile, what you're happy with on that side of things, and some people won't be. Some people say, this is too much, I'm too scared, I don't want to do it. And like, you know, if it goes wrong, that would be a disaster. This is not magic. You don't have to just close your eyes and jump into a dark well or something. This is something that can be designed. The way that a building is built, and its structural behavior and its energy behavior, and how insulating something or cutting off thermal bridges will impact upon brickwork or joists, whatever part of the structure of the building, is something you can absolutely, you can work that out, and then you can design accordingly. So we didn't just blindly build this building hoping that it would work. I mean, a lot of thought went into it, and a lot of learning came out of that, and a lot of learning continues to come out of how the building's performing and looking at it, and the structure is fine. So when I talk about taking risks, yeah, it's more psychological than real. The fact is, if you've got a sensible design team, this is not a problem. This is not an issue, as long as you do the work. You don't want a cowboy builder to whack in 200 mils of phenolic insulation on your wall without thinking about what the impact of that will be. That's a really bad idea. And that's why Green Tomato Energy, and part of the reason Green Tomato Energy exists, is to help people get it right. And it's important that they realise that.
So what are the key changes? It's funny being in this building. I imagine it hasn't changed that much if you'd come in before anything had happened and then afterwards perhaps a lick of paint. But what has changed as we look at it?
Okay, so part of the frustration for people who come here to do tours of the house is that, you know, there's not that much to see. And that's kind of the idea. And most of the interventions that we carried out are hidden behind the walls, behind the plasterboard, behind the paint, under the floors, in the ceiling, wherever it might be. So the differences are not that obvious. To sort of summarize what you have to do to create a passive house, it's the same whether it's a new build or an existing building retrofit, is you have to super insulate it. You have to, which we've done here. So there's 180 millimeters of insulation on the external walls, on the internal face of the external walls. There's 50 millimeters of insulation on the party walls. We have installed triple glazed windows, which look like sash windows from the outside, but they are not.
I'm just thinking that in itself, for a Victorian property, there must be a huge market about to open up here. But how did you do it then, being the first person?
Well, that is a whole nother story, and rather a controversial one. But the answer in brief is that they had to be made specially for the building. And part of our hope was that we would then go into the business of building and selling triple glazed windows, which hasn't materialised for all sorts of reasons, which I think best not talked about on this podcast. Well, they're just, complicated, commercial, really. Anyway, that may change, and hopefully somebody will create them, because I agree with you, that may well be a good market going forward. Certainly we've seen double glazed sash windows becoming very popular. There are some complications around triple glazed sash windows, which we can go into. The most notable one being that if they can't really be, except with quite expensive glazing units, they can't really be sliding sash units. They've got to be, these ones, for example, are actually more like a kind of European style window. So the top frame is fixed and the bottom pane opens on a tilt or turn mechanism. So you can open it like a door or tilt it inwards. So they're not actually sash windows. And part of the reason for that is if you have a sliding sash, they become much heavier with triple glazed units in them. So your sash weights need to be bigger. You need bigger sash boxes, and it all becomes really quite complicated. Plus, there's a kind of, if you have a sliding sash window, it's very difficult to create a good seal to make the window airtight. So you could have triple glazed panes of glass, but lots of heat loss through uncontrolled ventilation around the windows. So you slightly undermine the purpose of having triple glazed windows in the first place. So that's part of the reason why we may not see triple glazed windows being as popular as they are. One of the things about triple glazed windows that people don't realise, and perhaps anyone listening to this will will hear from the quietness in the background is that they're very good sound insulation. There's really very little noise in the house. It's much more peaceful than a typical house. And that again adds to the sense of stillness when you live here, which is great from a kind of Zen point of view.
Just having a listen to that. Yep, you're right.
So, sorry, you asked about...
Yeah, we covered the windows, we mentioned insulation. What about ventilation system? I can't even see a vent in it, or is that a vent up there?
There, you see on the floor.
Underneath. I wasn't going to look there.
So, yeah, there's vents either in the floor or the ceiling. It depends on how the ventilation, the ductwork is running. So the house is more or less airtight, which means that if you pressurize, if the house is unpressurized, you don't get drafts coming in and out of the house. You test airtightness by pressurizing the house using something called a blower door, and then you see how quickly the air escapes and where it escapes from, and then you try and plug the holes. And so in order for the house to be a passive house, it has to have fewer than 0.6 air changes per hour when the inside of the house is pressurized to 50 pascals, a pressure of 50 pascals. So you couldn't take the house into space, but it basically means that we don't lose a lot of heat through drafts coming in and out of windows and floorboards. But of course, you do need to ventilate for a few reasons. One, for air quality, so you can breathe good fresh air, and also to control moisture, because obviously you don't want lots of moisture building up and mold forming around the house and condensation on the windows and that kind of thing. So we have a big couple of fans in the basement. They're actually about 70 watts each. One fan sucks air into the house and distributes it around the living areas, and another fan sucks air out of the bathrooms and the kitchens and takes it and dumps it outside the house. And that means that the air is constantly circulating. Fresh air is constantly coming into the house, replacing the old air. And as a result, you get a kind of really nice balanced sense of fresh air in the house. It comes through a couple of filters which take out pollen and dust, so the air quality is typically higher than you would experience in a normal house. I don't know if you have a look at the surrounds of, say, a sash window or your window, you'll often see, especially in the city, black markings around it where the air's coming in. That shows the pollution coming in and the air leakage coming into the house. So you don't obviously have that here. And the air, every 2.5 hours, 100% of the air, there's 100% of the air is changed. So it's completely fresh. And yeah, it works really nicely.
Does all this make sense financially, or is it further down the line that it's going to make a lot more sense financially, or when is the payoff?
The payback, if you were to sort of take your savings versus the capital cost, in this case, the payback is in the region of about 35 years, straight line payback on this particular investment. But that assumes no capital uplift in the cost of the house. So if we put the house on the market, whether it would attract a higher price than a normal house, we don't know the answer to that question. It might well do, because obviously the buyer would be saving a lot on their energy bills. Obviously, that straight line payback depends on energy prices. So as energy prices rise, that payback gets shorter and shorter and shorter. People do think a lot about payback in this sense. I mean, I would encourage people to sort of realize the comfort and incidental benefits of living in a low energy house, other than just the financial side of it. It's not necessarily the only thing to think about. When you install a kitchen, you do so because it's going to be a nice kitchen and you're going to enjoy living and using the kitchen. Well, when you build a low energy house, it's going to be a nicer house and you're going to enjoy living there. And I can't remember the last time anyone other than a property developer worked out the payback time on a kitchen. So I think it's a bit of a red herring, really, which is unhelpful for the low energy house kind of community.
Also, when you came to get your various permissions for this, was that quite a simple process?
It's a standard planning process. We had to kind of jump through a few hoops because of the windows and because of the solar panels. But the solar panels now wouldn't be a problem, because since we built this house, there's been a sort of what you might call a solar revolution in the UK, and planners are much more used to having solar panels in conservation areas. So I don't think that would be nearly as much of an issue as it was for us. The windows were problematic, but other than that, it was just normal. I mean, most of the work is inside the building, so there's not that much to worry about from a planning point of view. The building regs guy, building control, was interested in the structural stuff and the ventilation, but once we explained how it would work, they were pretty relaxed.
And I know that you did a great video of this whole process as it went on, and we're going to link to that in the show notes for this episode. But Is it, I don't know how to say this, is it something that might scare people how much you strip back the building?
I think it would scare people. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any two ways about it. But some people will be doing huge works to their properties anyway. You've got to be pretty keen to achieve a property like this if you're going to do it just for the sake of doing it. I think that the thing to remember is that people renovate their houses on a fairly regular basis when they buy a new house, for example, or move houses or whatever it might be. And so that's the time to do works like this when you're doing works anyway. If you do it on a standalone basis, then it obviously becomes more expensive because you're doing all of the works around the energy works, and also more disruptive. In terms of stripping a house back to the brick, we didn't plan to do that, but as we started exposing more and more of the property, we discovered more and more woodworm and more wood rot and brickwork that needed redoing, and we had to put in some steels to support the central column in the house, stuff that we hadn't anticipated doing. And so eventually we ended up taking much more out of the property than we thought we would.
Is there anything you would have done differently?
There's some details, but not really, no. No, I think we possibly would have given another month's worth of design, but on the flip side, we were keen to get on with it and get moved back into the house. No, I mean, I think it was, if you do something differently, then you'll have a different problem. So, no, I think just approach it with an open mind and be prepared for challenges.
And finally, for anyone listening who owns a period property and is starting to think down these lines, do you have any tips, maybe 3 tips of things that might help them?
Yep. I think the first tip is to spend more time planning it than you think you need, and then add a bit on top of that, because I can't overstate how much easier it is to do a building like this when it's properly thought through and properly designed. Second thing is to have a really good team. So make sure that all of your team, right from the designer, the architect, the structural engineer, energy engineer, the builder, they really understand what you're trying to achieve and they buy into it. So they're not just doing a job, but they really share your objective, particularly the builder, and make sure the building, that goes right through the building team. And thirdly, I think just like in any building project, make sure that you've got enough money to finish, because it is quite radical and to do something of this scale. And the last thing you want is to be kind of caught halfway through and unable to finish in a completely gutted house.
Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Another industry expert on houseplanninghelp.com.
And we haven't quite finished with Green Tomato Energy. We are going to make this a 2-part episode. I'll tell you more in a few moments. But in the show notes, there's a link to their website and also to that video that I mentioned. For quick reference to any of the podcasts that we have done, you can go to houseplanninghelp.com / and then the number of the episode, and that will take you straight to the show notes. Nice and handy, nice and quick, / the number of the episode. This brings me to a great bit of feedback, or great for me, because it's reassuring and it's encouraging and it makes me think I'm doing this for a reason. This is from Dr. James Shorrock, who got in touch on email, and he says, "Hi Ben, firstly, great work and a great idea. I've greatly enjoyed your first few podcasts. I listen on my way to and from work, which is usually dead time. We're planning a major 6 to 12 month redo / conversion of our 1993 3-bed bungalow to a 5-bed house. I'm very keen to make it as eco as possible and have been excited to learn more about Passivhaus, etc. I've been researching the usual heat pump options, but I think maximising the building fabric / insulation has got to be the best starting point. I'd be very keen for some more info on insulation, including the loft, wall, roof, from some of those suppliers. For speed of build, we are hoping to use pre-made SIP panels, which have excellent eco-insulation properties also. An addition on the use, construction, planning of this build method would be excellent. Anyway, excited to see where you go. Good luck with it, and best wishes, James." This is a great email, and I've thought about it for the last couple of days since it's come in, that we've actually influenced someone making decisions out there. This is a big step for me. Yeah, bear with me for a moment. So as I chat to people and do my research, You make up your own mind and see what you think, but this is great news, and we will certainly do that. I had planned to look into insulation a bit more, and I went to a talk the other day, so I know the various types, the natural, the fossil fuel, the mineral, but they all have different properties and different places where they might be used, which makes it nice and confusing, as with everything. I also want to do an episode on the overall energy situation of the world, and I've got one lined up with Dr. Brenda Boardman. She was the person who came up with the phrase fuel poverty, which, although it was 20 years ago, it hasn't really gone away. If anything, it's got worse, so I'm looking forward to chatting to her. We haven't even touched renewables yet, have we? And we'll definitely put SIP panels on the list. Before I go, I'd like to recommend something to you if you're working in the construction sector at the moment. A friend of mine, Caesar Abaid, he hosts the Construction Industry Podcast. It's very good, and I'm going to put that into the show notes so that you can go and check it out, and hopefully we'll also have a chat with Caesar on the podcast a little bit further down the line. And one other thing, I'd love it if you could write us a review on iTunes. If you have enjoyed this podcast, it'd be great. I'd love a 5-star review, but I'll take anything. So if you head to iTunes and fill out a review, that just helps our visibility for anyone else who might be wanting to build a house, and hopefully this will flag it up to them. So we're just about done. Next time on the podcast from houseplanninghelp.com, we continue with Victorian properties. We're staying with Green Tomato Energy, but we shift over to Alex Rice, who's very bright. He's the senior engineer there, and we're going to look at some technical challenges. I hope I'm ready for that. Until that point, always lovely to have you here.
You've been listening to Ben Adam Smith on the path to build a better home. Sign up now to the free email newsletter. Head to houseplanninghelp.com.